This is the second video for the 11th class of psychological perspectives on health. In the first video, I talked about cognitive behavioral model, and then while cognitive behavioral model argues that changes in thoughts can help individuals to feel better, which will help them to take actions. But actually, the research shows that behaviors change their thoughts, and changes in thoughts makes them feel better. And then behaviors that behaviors that promote social engagement is particularly effective. And then also, sorry, uh, cognitive behavioral therapy is especially effective when patients can develop alliance with their therapist because alliance with their therapist could work something like social capital or bridging capital that help them to create new social relationship with others. Okay, so this kind of research kind of already indicates maybe it is a connection with others that help people to treat their depression. And then we will further look into how other models understand depression. The interpersonal stress model. So this model tries to understand what precipitates a depressed episode. So when people have a depressed episode, what happened before that? Okay. And according to attachment theory, before the attachment theory, it argues that early life interactions with caregivers are internalized and influence social interactions, and particularly in family and intimate relationship throughout the lifespan. The attachment theory argues that interaction that they had when they are children, when they are child, would influence how they may interact with their family members and then someone who may develop intimate relationships. And also interpersonal trauma such as violence, emotional abuse, insult, humiliate, instill fear leads to future depression by undermining social trust and hindering the development of appropriate social relationships. So if they have good relationships when they are children, then they are more likely to build good relationship with others. And thus they will not they can develop social trust, and they would not be isolated by others. And thus they are not likely to develop depression. But if they have interpersonal trauma, then that would undermine developing social trust. And then they are more likely to be isolated and they will feel lonely, which will increase the possibility that they will develop depression. This is a kind of explanation that social attachment theory provides for why depression is developed. Okay, so in this sense, attachment theory kind of argues that some special events will people make people feel depressed, make people develop depression. Okay, but other theories argue that actually any life stresses can develop uh, depression. And then if you remember social readjustment rating scale, maybe you can go back to the SRRS and then look into what kind of events are in the scale. Okay. And then you may notice that actually there are something like losing something or someone. For example, divorce, bereavement, and retirement are in the list. So that means that events that uh, events when people lose something or someone is stressful. And that is when people are particularly vulnerable and need help most. And this view argues that depression is not unique to a certain type of person. It's not like someone who had interpersonal trauma when they were small, but instead, depression could happen to anyone under certain life circumstances. Certain life circumstances such as losing something or someone. Okay. And another hypothesis or explanation of why people develop or why people have depressive symptom or why people develop depressive episode. Well, sorry, back off. What happens when people have depressed episode? The stressing buffering hypothesis. This argues that not everyone develops depression under certain life circumstances. So, you know, both attachment theory and other theories focusing on life events basically argues that if they have this kind of life events, then they're likely to develop depression. Okay, it's like a situational model. But you know, we have been thinking why we have individual differences, right? And this stress buffering hypothesis tries to take into account the individual differences. And they basically argue that those with access to social support would not develop depression even if they have certain life circumstances, certain stressful life events. Okay. Um, yeah, so basically they looked into social integration and the figure comes from the research by also Gomel. Sorry, I'm totally sorry that I don't know how to pronounce these researches, but the title of the research is Lack of Social Support and Incidence of Coronary Heart Disease in Middle-Aged Swedish Men. So basically, they looked at the lack of social support or lack of social integration is related to the incidence of coronary heart disease. And social integration can be measured with several items like number of people with whom respondents share interest, number of friends or family members with whom respondent can talk frankly, or someone available whom respondent can ask small favors. Maybe you may want to think how many people you may have these kinds of people. And if you have more people like this, then you are less likely to have coronary disease. This is what the research found. So those with low social integration had higher incidence of coronary heart disease in 6 years. So at one point they completed this social integration measure, and from that point to uh, by 6 years after completing the measure, uh, there was higher incidence of coronary heart disease if they do not have much social integration, if their social integration was low. And then, if they had middle level of social integration, their incidence was uh, lower than those with low social integration, but still higher than those with high social integration. And then those with high social integration had least incidence of coronary heart disease. So basically, this seems to support the stress buffering hypothesis. So if they have access to social support, if they have high social integration, then they are less likely to develop some disease, and maybe they are less likely to develop depression. But yes, as you may anticipate, there are limitations of stress buffering hypothesis. So the stress buffering hypothesis argues the specific interaction between social support and stress. But this interaction does not predict mental health outcomes well. So this is basically what stress buffering hypothesis argues. Okay, this is an actual result that uh, research found, but this is a hypothetical result that this hypothesis argues. Okay, so maybe you may not be familiar with the term of interaction, but basically interaction means that effects of one condition depends on the other condition. And in this example, one of the conditions is how much stress they have. Do they have low stress or do they have high stress? Okay. And the other condition is how much they have support, social support. Do they have high social support or do they have low social support? And the stress buffering hypothesis argues that there is an interaction between stress and social support. Or maybe there is yeah, okay. I think that's right. And if okay, so the effect of stress on mental health depends on the degrees of social support they have. This is the stress buffering hypothesis. So if they do not have much social support, basically this orange line, the more stress they have, the lower their mental health is. So basically, stress has strong effect on mental health if the individuals do not have social support. But the effect of stress is much weaker if you have high social support. So you can see the difference between high stress and low stress on mental health is much smaller when smaller for those with high social support, right? So this is a hypothesis that, well, this is a prediction that the stress buffering hypothesis provides. However, 3 out of 58 studies supported the interaction. So basically, the hypothesis was not supported. And this textbook argued that maybe, I mean, there are direct relationship between social support, perceived stress, and mental health. So when do people feel stress? Actually, that's when they do not have social support, or when they lose social support. And then, of course, if they feel stressed, their mental health will go down. And if they do not have social support, their mental health will go down. And the question is, when people feel stressed and when people lose social support, that's when they lose their social identity. Remember the research examining Black people. When they leave their Black community and then join more affluent or white community, then they lose their old social support from Black community, right? And also, because they newly joined the new white community, they also cannot get social support white community. And that's when they feel the most, when they feel stress most. Okay. So, yeah, basically, and this model was further developed into social psychological, I mean, sorry, the social identity model of identity change. You remember. And basically, this model argues that uh, when there is a change in their life or life transitions, this means if you move from Black community to white community, or if you lose someone close to you, right? then it will negatively impact your health or well-being. But if you belong to multiple group memberships, that will work as a bonding capital, and then you can maintain group memberships, and then you can benefit from social support, and thus you have better health and well-being. And also, if you belong to multiple group memberships, that would function as a bridging capital. And thus you can gain new identities. And gaining new identities will help you to have better health and well-being. Okay. So this social identity approach basically argues that social relationships or social support do not moderate the effects of stress, but absence of social relationships or social support is the cause of poor mental health and depressive condition. Okay. So when they do not have social relationships or social support, that's when they lose social identity or they do not have any groups that they can belong. Okay. So basically, this is why stress buffering hypothesis does not predict the health outcomes, mental health outcomes well. Social support is not independent from the levels of stress people experience. When people are experiencing stress, they're very likely that they lost social support or they lost their social identities. So basically, they just come together. And that's why social support cannot work as a buffer to the stressful event because the loss of social support or loss of social identity is itself the cause of stress and then poor mental health. So direct relationship between social connectedness and depression. An increase in loneliness and accompanying social withdrawal precedes rather than follows the development of depression. So at the beginning of this lecture, this chapter, I talked about uh, social withdrawal as a symptom of depression right here. So biochemical and cognitive behavior models conceptualize social withdrawal as a symptom or maintenance factor in depression. But social identity approach argues that social withdrawal can be a cause and it actually precedes the development of depression. And so if that's the case, you may ask what life conditions make people feel lonely? What life events, or not necessarily, sorry, the events, but what life conditions makes people socially withdraw and when people lack social skills. Then you may want to ask what makes people lack social skills. And there is a psychotherapy technique called interpersonal psychotherapy therapy and it targets the improvement of social skills. So basically, the psychotherapy tries to train people to change ways of thinking and think realistically. So they try to change cognitions and they try to train people to think realistically. So for example, if you say hi to your boss didn't say hi back to you. And then people may think, okay, maybe that's because boss hates me. But think realistically, you work together with the boss and then even if, boss hates you, if the boss is reasonable and logical person, then in order to improve the performance of the workplace, maybe the boss should say hi back to you. Then why the boss didn't say hi to you? Maybe because your voice was too small. Maybe the boss was thinking something different and just didn't notice that you said hi. That kind of thoughts change. And interpersonal therapy makes people consider behavior options they could take. So if you say hi and the boss ignores you, what can you do? Maybe you say hi again later, or maybe you say hi with louder voice. But interpersonal psychotherapy fails to take into account the role of social processes. Okay. It means that it doesn't explain or it doesn't take into account why people lack social skills or when people develop social skills. There are some kinds of people who have social skills without such psychotherapy, and there are some people who do not have such social skills. And the psychotherapy, this interpersonal psychotherapy, doesn't really ask why there are such differences. And social identity approach or the textbook argues that the best way to develop interpersonal relationships is to define the self and the others as members of the same group, perceiving others as in-group members or a part of self. So remember the example of uh, German and Greek, right? If they categorize themselves as Europeans, then Germans are more likely to provide support, and Greek are more likely to receive the support positively. And that's same for interpersonal level. If uh, two individuals can categorize themselves as a member of same group, then the provision of social support would be more natural, and the reception of social support would be also natural. And then they know better how to interact with others because if they can categorize themselves as the same as members of the same group, then it's more like treating oneself instead of others. And they know how to be kind to self better than how to be kind to others. And so the way they interact with others would be more natural and then less stressful. So that's I think, the idea. So the social identity approach to depression, the goal of the social identity approach to depression are to integrate a clinical account of depression symptoms, like what kind of symptoms depressed people have, and social psychological account of the nature of social relationship. When people have best social relationship with others, and as we have seen, that is when people define themselves and others as members of a same group. And the goals to explain how and why stressful events such as social loss, trauma, and social isolation appear to trigger depression onset and relapse. And it tries to explain why cognitive behavior therapy and interpersonal psychotherapy might work well. So it basically tries to understand why sometimes they work and that when sometimes they don't work. And then maybe there are some social relationship factors that help those therapies work better. And social identity approach tries to understand such social relationship factors. Okay, yeah, a bit more. Social relationships counteract depression when they inform the self-concept. So Turner, who is a researcher, Turner is a researcher who proposed self-categorization theory and also who was the student of Tashwell, who developed social identity theory. And then he mentioned that we understand ourselves not only on the basis of what makes us unique and different from others, but critically on the basis of what we have in common with others. So we understand ourselves through the lens of how we categorize ourselves together with others, which means self-categorization. So people often think about the uniqueness of themselves, right? In order to understand who I am, people tend to think what kind of unique skills I have, or how can I be different from others, right? Like popular media always encourage young people to be unique and encourage young people to find dreams that are different from others. But in order to understand yourself, that's not the only way. But you could also understand yourself by looking into commonalities you may share with others. And that's actually what people do often. And then if you focus only the uniqueness that you have, you would not develop relationship with others. You would basically miss the in-groupiness that you may have with others. So social relationships would have implications for our health and well-being when they give us a sense of social identity, a sense of who we are. So if social relationships provide only good or bad, positive or negative interpersonal relationships, maybe it doesn't really help us to be healthy. But if social relationships provide a sense of social identity or solidarity with others, then you would have basically you will have positive relationships with others because that's going to be the relationship between self and self, not the self and others, you know? And then you are more likely to provide social support and you're more likely to receive social support positively. And that's the kind of positivity and solidarity will positively contribute to your health and well-being. And here is a research showing that joining social groups reduced the likelihood of experiencing a first episode of depression. Yeah. So basically, this research found that if people belong to more groups, they are less likely to experience a first episode of depression. So basically, if people belong to many groups, then they will not develop depression. Okay. In addition to that, uh, I think, I think I recreated this figure from the textbook, but I think this comes from the research done by Cruvis. So basically, in addition to uh, belonging to social groups help people not to develop depression in the first place. But also, even if they develop depression, if they belong to more groups, then they are less likely to experience depression relapse. Okay? So if they do not belong to any groups, then the percentage of people relapsed are like close to, I mean, it's about 40%. But if they at least belong to one important group, then the percentage of experiencing relapse would be 30%. If they belong to two groups, that would be 20%. And if they belong to three or more, then that would be 15%. Remember, the percentage that people have experienced depression relapse was like, okay, I don't remember. Let's go back. Eh, Wow. Okay, so there are differences, or there is a variability in terms of how much people experience depression relapse. So some people, like 25% of people may experience depression relapse, while 50% of people may experience re depression relapse, and then 80% of people who had depression experience relapse at some point, you know. And then maybe the number of social groups people belong kind of explains why there is such variability. If they belong to at least one or two groups, the percentage of experiencing depression relapse is around 30 to 20%, basically. So 25%. The mean would be 25%. And then, so I think this really explains uh, belonging to social groups really help people not to develop depression or not to experience depression relapse. And a therapy that focuses on building shared social identities and shared group memberships would be more effective than one improving interpersonal relationships. So even if they can develop good interpersonal skills, it doesn't help them to or maybe belonging, gaining new identities or gaining new group memberships is more direct and effective to reduce the likelihood of depression relapse. And this is because the source of stress uh, is often related to social relationships, and having groups, belonging to groups is the best way to have positive social relationships with others instead of developing interpersonal skills that may help them to have positive social relationships. Okay? And also, not only because they have good social relationships with others. Okay, maybe let me say it in this way. Interpersonal skills may help you to have good social relationships, but it doesn't help you to understand who you are. But social identities help you to develop good interpersonal relationships with others and help you to understand who you are. And understanding of who you are helps you to feel better and safe. And furthermore, belonging to groups or having clear social identity help you to have positive social relationships. So belonging to groups and developing social identities can work as resources for your better health. Okay. So it has more benefits than just having good interpersonal skills. Okay, so I think there is enough for this class, this lecture, and then we will continue looking into chapter 8 in the next class. And then after finishing chapter 8, we will move on to the last chapter, chapter 15. And that will conclude our lecture. So this is 11th class, right? So we have only two more. Okay, thank you very much.